Item on the agenda is House File 1024. Chair Pinto, would you like to move your bill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that House File 1024 be referred to the Education Finance Committee.
So moved. Chair Pinto, please present your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So members, we have spent the last month hearing a series of presentations kind of laying the foundation for our work in this committee. And in those presentations, we've seen how critical the earliest years are. And I hope the members will agree at this point that there's really nothing more important that we do as a society than get those earliest years right. Once we do that, that's the foundation for everything else that follows. We've also heard about then a series of programs that state government oversees that are intended to support that process. And we've heard about those programs being in a wide variety of places throughout agencies. I've been studying this for a number of years, and I will admit that even I have been dizzied a little bit by just the sheer variety and the locations of programs all over. And so what the proposal in front of you today is to have a department that is dedicated to this extremely important societal goal and making sure that our state is supporting families in their work to make sure that the children get off to that terrific start and are ready for kindergarten and ready to go. Something that really right now we don't have someone in state government who is responsible and accountable and has the authority for that really below the level of the governor and lieutenant governor. So first, members, we're going to be hearing from a couple of national experts talking about how this is working in other states and a distinct trend towards this, and talking about the proposal, and then get into some of the details. So my first testifier then is from the National Conference of State Legislatures, Allison May, if she can speak with us, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. Excuse me. Welcome to the committee, Ms. May. Would you please state your name again for the record and proceed with your testimony and presentation?
Yes. Thank you, Chair Pinto. Good morning, committee members. My name is Allison May, and I'm an Early Care and Education Policy Associate at the National Conference of State Legislatures, or NCSL for short. During my few minutes with you, I'd like to share a bit about what NCSL does, then focus in on my work related to early childhood, including tracking early childhood governance action, and then just share some highlights and overviews of some of the legislative activity we've been seeing. I'll be happy to answer your questions. If I'm unable to provide an answer today, I could do the necessary research and connect early next week. So the National Conference of State Legislatures is the country's most trusted bipartisan organization, serving legislators and staff for more than 40 years. We promote policy innovation, create opportunities for lawmakers to share knowledge, and ensure that state legislatures have a strong and cohesive voice at the federal level. NCSL is the only organization that serves all 7,383 legislators and the some 25,000 legislative staff. And notably, we track more than 1,400 different policy areas. So some really big and broad things, some very narrow focused topics as well. And in a typical year, we host more than 100 policy-oriented meetings. So my work in the Early Care and Education Project falls within our Children and Families or Human Services program. And my focus is policy that's related from the prenatal period through pre-kindergarten. So one of our big things we do is track legislation in a whole host of early childhood issue areas, ranging from pre-kindergarten, childcare, home visiting, and early childhood governance. All that information is available on the web, including links to the bill text. And then annually, we summarize and produce a report of major enactments. 2020 will be out in about a week. Our writing comes in the forms of policy briefs, reports, web pages on a whole host of topics, and these are a few of the more recent. And then related to convenings, we host them with frequency. And for the legislators and staff on the line, I'd invite you to register for the State Policy 101. We're hosting every Friday in February. Tomorrow, I'm going to be exploring paid leave. And then next week, we're talking about early childhood more broadly. So as we drill down and start to think about early childhood governances, there are really three primary approaches that states look at: create, consolidate, collaborate, and coordinate. So let me share a few examples to better explain that. So in the first approach, creating a dedicated early childhood agency, and there are six states that have done this. We can look to Alabama, Washington, and then Chair Pinto's House File 1024. So the Alabama Department of Early Childhood Education was created as an executive department of state government, replacing the Department of Children's Affairs. The reason: to effectively oversee programs and to support children in Alabama. The department has 4 offices that guide the state's early childhood priorities. And then we can look to Washington State. And in 2017, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, a cabinet level department, was created to focus on the well-being of children. And the real goal was to help produce better outcomes for Washington communities. Other states that have gone in this direction include Connecticut, Georgia, Massachusetts, and New Mexico. As we move to the next item, consolidate, there are 12 states and the District of Columbia that have consolidated several agencies or programs into one entity that oversees multiple components. An example we can look to is Maryland. And in 2005, all early childhood programs were moved to the newly created Division of Early Childhood, which is housed within the Maryland Department of Education. And finally, 32 states have various different agencies that provide programs and services that require coordination between the agencies. A quick example would be the Pennsylvania Office of Child Development and Early Learning. This is overseen jointly by Departments of Human Services and Education and was created in 2006. And then a second and more recent example is Delaware, where they consolidated the Office of Child Care Licensing into the Office of Early Learning within the Department of Education. I think worth noting is whichever direction states go, the main goal should really be better outcomes for children and better communication throughout the areas of the state that touch the lives in some form or fashion of children and families. So as we start to look a little more specifically at legislative action, I want to mention that when I am saying early childhood governance, I'm talking about legislative action NCSL has flagged in our database, and it includes legislation relating to advisory councils and boards, study committees, and systems. So this is a bit broader than Chair Pinto's new bill 1024. Of course, legislative activity to establish a department would be included in this area. An additional note, we do find often that legislation might fit in more than one location. So a bill might be tagged in governance, but also childcare or pre-kindergarten as an example. I don't want to say much about the stats on here. I do want to point out 2 examples from 2019. So in 2019, Maine introduced Senate Bill 513, which, if enacted, would have created the Department of Early Care and Learning. They did, however, have some other legislative activity that was enacted that year. The other big story from 2019 was Senate Bill 22 in the land of enchantment, or New Mexico. This bill created and established the Early Childhood Education and Care Department, which officially launched this past summer. The legislation created a transfer of early childhood related functions of other state agencies to the department. Excuse me. And through, though 2020 was a unique year, we continue to see legislators grapple with infrastructure and the administration of programs that serve young children and their families. So this map shows the action that we tracked last year. There were a total of 49 bills from 18 different states on this topic. And then there were 6 states that passed a total of 10 bills, altering the governance of early childhood programs. Likely your eyes are noticing that the states highlighted really do represent both red states, blue states, and purple states. I will just pick out one thing. Arguably in 2020, the Virginia legislature made the most sweeping changes with the creation of a new office of the Children's Ombudsman and mandate for a unified early child care education system. And as we take a look at 2021, almost all states are back in session now. A few have already begun introducing governance-related legislation. I can share anecdotally that a handful of states, both more conservative and more liberal, are currently discussing early childhood governance issues. Session's fairly early on in many states, though I haven't spotted legislation to create an own department similar to Representative Pinto's. But there are a handful of states that are introducing and enacting, and then in Missouri, we have an executive order to consolidate some programs. And then a final few thoughts that I do want to share with you all. We do know that early childhood receives very strong support from Republicans, independents, and Democrats alike. We also know that both red, blue, and purple states are currently engaging in conversations around early childhood governance. So the current introduced legislation here in Minnesota aligns with how other states have worked to tackle and amend their governance system. So creating new departments has been shown to be effective in other states. And if enacted, having the appropriate timeline to implement, along with all the key stakeholders as part of the conversation, will certainly be key to your success. I've noted just 3 external resources, including Elliot's report, who we'll hear more from momentarily. I'll flag that the first and last bullet points there also include state profiles, so you can really dig into Minnesota specific, along with neighboring states, which is sometimes interesting. So in closing, happy to take any of your questions. Thank you for the opportunity, and legislators, please remember NCSL is here to support you, so do feel free to call on us.
You need to unmute,
Chair, you're
Madam
on
Chair.
mute.
All right, that's what happens when you have multiple screens up. Thank you, committee, for pointing that out for me. I appreciate that help. And thank you, Ms. May, for your presentation. I trust you'll be able to stay with us through the end of our presentations and our bill presentation, and we will be taking member questions at that point. Chair Pinto, would you like to call on your second presenter? And you're on mute. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members. Members that Ms. May referenced Elliot Regenstein and the report that he had that was in one of the links on that last slide, and so we're going to hear from him next.
Thank you, Representative Pinto, Vice Chair Pryor, and members of the committee. I'm Elliot Regenstein from Foresight Law and Policy. And many thanks to Polly for sharing the slides. So the reason I'm here today is that last year I had the opportunity to work on a report that's called Early Childhood Governance, Getting There From Here. And for that report, interviewed national and state leaders from across the country, including more than half of the states, about early childhood governance. So talked to a wide range of states across the political spectrum, some states that have made major governance changes, others that have not. And from that conversation distilled a set of lessons. And I'm going to start with a very high level overview right now, but we'll be available to answer questions when we get to that point in the program. So on the next slide, it talks about some of the key concepts to have in mind in thinking about governance. Governance is all about trade-offs, right? There's no perfect system. And so the question is Minnesota's governance system set up to achieve its substantive goals? In early childhood, you've had the opportunity through preschool development grants in particular to develop a strategic plan and talk about what your state goals are. And so now the question is what is the governance structure that will most effectively help you achieve that? In thinking about that, the trade-offs that other states have made can be instructive. Their experience is probably informative, but your knowledge of the Minnesota context is going to be the most important thing. And so again, I present lessons from other states with the knowledge that while that can be useful to predict what might happen in Minnesota, it's not necessarily the case. It's also important to emphasize that to make a transition from the current state to any future state, as this bill proposes, comes at some cost. But there is also a cost to not acting, right? And what a lot of states have thought about is the idea that they're spending tens of millions, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars on early childhood, and that to spend all of that money in through an organization that is not or optimized to really manage that system they find inefficient, and they'd rather pay the cost of doing the work up front so that they can then run the sort of larger annual expenditure in a more effective way. So on the next slide, and this sort of builds on the point I was just making. Early childhood is a very fragmented system. You have childcare, you have Head Start, you have preschool, you have home visiting. And as long as each individual program is being run by program administrators who, again, in many instances are doing the absolute best they can with the mandate they've been given, there is a big difference between trying to coordinate among programs and having a single commissioner level leader who is responsible for making sure that those programs work together, right? Because the interactions among those programs are dynamic and take place in a complicated market. So having an agency that can build that expertise and take that leadership, right? In some states, the idea of having a commissioner level leader who can speak for the system, who is accountable to stakeholders in the system, has been a critical part of the conversation. So that role is one that's not currently being played in most states. And in some ways, again, the states that have made changes have done so not necessarily because they were dissatisfied with the jobs that their current staff were doing, but because they realized that even if the staff in the current jobs were doing everything they could, there were still roles in managing the system that no one was playing, and that the creation of a new structure would allow those roles to be played. In thinking about how they go about that, states have had somewhat different emphases on what is most important to them. A few of the priorities that have driven states in governance changes have included minimizing the burden on families, right? Right now, when the system is disorganized, families are the ones who bear the burden of navigating it. Can a single state agency play a stronger role in helping those families? I've talked about improving efficiency, and obviously states are also looking at how do we expand access to services and how do we ensure quality, where part of that conversation is having a consistent definition of quality across multiple programs, or at least harmonized definitions, even if they're not exactly the same. So on the next slide, just a couple of important considerations for states as they, and for you in particular, based on the experience of other states. So the idea of comparative advantage is really important, and that there are certain functions within an early childhood system that in effect have to be played by state government. But there are other functions that are probably better off being played at a regional or local level, and that a change in governance is an opportunity to think about what those are and what functions you might want to put at a state agency, at a regional hub, or at the community level. And in this bill, there is attention to that, or at least the notion of regional hubs that would then have to be developed. It's important to think about state personnel capacity, right, at multiple levels. As I mentioned, one of the things states have looked for is creating a commissioner level leader on this topic, but you also need to have strong managers and then adequate staff to get the job done. That's true in any configuration. When configuring state capacity, you need to think about connective tissue across agencies and about analytic capacity. In Minnesota, there's a children's cabinet and a state advisory council. A change like this does not make the need for those bodies go away. It might change their role somewhat, but there's no scenario in which an early childhood agency is running everything in education and health to the point that it doesn't need to collaborate. So those collaborative bodies remain important. And a transition period. States that have made this change, there is a balance to be struck between keeping the work moving and having a sense of urgency about it, right? You don't want a 10-year timeline because then nothing happens, but you also don't want to try to do this in a few months because there are a lot of moving parts that need to be managed. I will say that the states that have gone through it have been very generous with their time, and that New Mexico in particular has shared a lot of its materials with other states that are thinking about going through it. and have talked about some of the lessons they learned in their very recent transition. So again, I can get into some of those if people are interested, but that there is a community that looks out for states on this. So a couple of final thoughts. The framework of this bill is very similar to what other states have done. Again, it includes attention to regional capacity and a transitional period. Really important to emphasize that how the transitional period gets used is critical, and that in a transitional period, there is a need both for the folks within state government affected by the transition to have a little bit of protected space, right? Like they are going to need an opportunity to communicate with each other on their own outside the eyes of larger stakeholders, because there are some things that are very sensitive that they're going to need to work on. But it's also incredibly important to have public involvement and accountability in the larger process. Continued legislative oversight, lots of stakeholder engagement, appropriate advisory groups, and an inclusive transition process is key to the success, because that's what engages all the people who are going to end up being the partners of this agency, and that their views on how it should be shaped are really important. I will say that that sounds like a lot of work, and it probably is, but that every state I had talked to that went through the transition ended up feeling like it was worth it. And that was true, again, across the political spectrum, across the nature of transitions, right? Different states ended up with different models. Washington's actually an interesting case because they created a Department of Early Learning more than a decade ago, felt like they kind of botched the landing, right? That they had done a pretty bad job of getting it set up. But eventually the agency found its land legs, and then when they created the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, they were building on that platform from years earlier. And that's an important idea too, is that this is not sort of, we're gonna pass a bill now and then check back in 15 years to see how it went. It's, if you pass a bill, how do you think of that as the jumping off point for continued conversation and a body of ongoing work that, again, will require the legislature and other stakeholders to remain engaged? So I've said a lot. That is all I will say at the outset, but really glad to have this opportunity and happy to answer any questions people have when we get into discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Regenstein. At this point, members, if you have questions for Chair Pinto or for our testifiers, please raise your hand and we'll call on you.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Yes, Chair.
I just a few other remarks to lead into those questions, if that's okay. I just want to make sure the members are aware that our state has actually been studying this for coming up on 10 years now. There was a 2011 report from a legislatively mandated task force that called for the creation of a dedicated agency. The call at that point was for an office, supposed to be the equivalent of the Office of Higher Education, but it would similarly combine programs into one dedicated separate state agency. So we've been studying this for a number of years, and there was very strong support in that proposal for this. And I want to note the letters of support that are on our committee website, and urge members of the public and members of the committee, of course, to take a look at them. They include a link to that 2011 task force report. I want to make sure that that members are just aware briefly of the content of the bill, because it is pretty simple. There's the summary, two-page summary on the committee website, which indicates that what the proposal is to pull programs from relating to home visiting from the Department of Health, relating to early care and learning, Departments of Human Services and Department of Education. Those programs are listed, and per the point of Mr. Regenstein, we're really talking about a fairly lengthy implementation timeline to make sure that this work is done in the right way, make sure that our agency does stick the landing. I know Washington State has been thrilled with their own agency dedicated to this, but it took a little while for that to settle because of possibly rushing that situation. So this would take effect the upcoming gubernatorial term, so 2 years from now, to make sure there's a nice 2-year lead time. And then I want to confirm a couple of other things. This would not add any new programs. We're talking about taking the existing programs, putting this in this department. But if you think about the 3 options that were laid out by Ms. May of coordinating programs, consolidating inside of one of the existing agencies, or having a new agency, it seems that there's a real advantage rather than if you think about some of the disadvantages explained in coordinating among different places that has some real challenges. You could imagine putting them, combining programs into one of our existing departments, but putting all the programs in the Department of Human Services or all the Department of Education. There are some challenges there we can talk about if folks are interested. To my mind, having an agency with a dedicated authority, as was described, is a huge advantage. And with that, I think we probably are ready for questions. And Madam Chair, thank you so much.
Well, I will start with questions. One question that I have is, and I think I'll direct this to the bill author, Chair Pinto. Could you talk about any concrete kind of like measurements that we've seen between a state like Washington that's gone down this path where they're saying, yes, you know, these are our measures of success. Now that we feel like we've gotten our act together and it's working. Could you address some of those benefits that they're seeing right now, or other states that are seeing right now? Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I might actually direct the national question to perhaps Mr. Regenstein, and just want to note for members, I'm so glad you brought this up, Madam Chair, the programmatic metrics that are contained in the bill. And if you look on page 5 of the bill, there are a series of very concrete program objectives and program measures that are laid out. And then a report that the commissioner would need to make to us, to our committees in the legislature, reporting about exactly how the department is, quote, effectively coordinating and creating efficiencies among programs as well as funding streams, and precisely how those program measures are being accomplished. So we have a lot of that in this proposal in Minnesota, but as far as how it's working in other states, I guess I'll defer to somebody else on that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to jump in, and I think it's a great question because it's something that states have to some degree struggled with. You know, and it's sort of, even within states that have done it, depends on who you talk to, right? Like there are some advocates who say their only metric is, are more kids getting served, right? But that's ultimately a legislative function primarily, you know, relating to budget. So, you know, they're thinking of it in terms of having a commissioner who can make the case for that. When you think of how states have approached it, though, I think that the metrics they've used are probably very, in many ways similar to what, you know, Representative Pinto is talking about, that you can look at, are we managing things more efficiently? Are we making it easier for parents, right? In some ways, it's hard to have standardized metrics, but it is something that if you set yourself to certain tasks, you could, and I would recommend this as part of it, you know, commission an independent evaluation of, did we do what we said we were going to do? Because a lot of this comes down to operational efficiency. It's not always, you know, and operational efficiency, not just in the sense of, is the agency itself running efficiently, but are we managing the entire pot of tens of millions of dollars more efficiently? You know, I think it's worth having a conversation at the beginning about what your metrics of success are going to be, and then holding yourselves to account on that, but that there's not some standard set of metrics of success that all the states have used.
Thank you, Chair Pinto and Mr. Regenstein. Next, we'll go to Representative Bennett for your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just excuse me 1 second here. I have a noisy cat, probably going to interrupt us. So I'm contemplating all the things I've heard, and I agree with the concept of the better coordination, better governance, and hopefully, you know, better service for people, you know, government serving people. But I do have concerns for the future. Especially when government starts doing things like this, and there are all these good ideas, quite often they tend to grow and grow and grow and turn into these monstrous things all on their own. And I am concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the cost of the transfer and doing this right now being, when we're facing a deficit, I want to make sure that we're putting as much funding we can into programming and not into government. And so I'm questioning if this is the right time to do this because of our deficit situation. But here I do have a couple of questions. So one, I'm wondering if, Mr. Chair, author of the bill, if this should be more of a phased approach. And your opinion on that, because we're kind of trusting Chapter 15 right now to make sure this is handled smoothly and so on, and transferring cleanly from these three agencies. And what happens, for example, if federal entanglements, we don't get the authorization and so on that we need for various programs, and just wondering if a phased approach might be better. And also if you could comment on the cost of the transfer, and because that's a concern to me as well, just right now.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. I will direct that then to Chair Pinto, the bill author.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Bennett, for the two great questions. So first of all, regarding the phased approach, I guess it feels like in a way that it is set up that way, in that it would not take effect for a full 2 years from this summer. So I suppose 2.5 years from now. And so that really does give the chance to make sure that things are both coming together right. And I suppose it means that if things are really looking like they're going to go in a really bad direction, it gives the chance for, there'll be several legislative sessions leading up to that point to say, boy, we need to take a different direction. We know that, regarding federal entanglement, we know that with multiple states having done this, I don't expect, we have models of this having been done. So I think we can be pretty confident that there's not some major landmine that tells us that this is just completely can't be done. But if there are tweaks that are necessary, the nice thing is that we have a couple years leading up to it. And it seems like that was the national expertise that was shared with me in putting this together, was to make sure to have that period of time. So in a way, I guess it is a phased approach, so to speak, in that way to really lead up to it. And then regarding the cost, there's a cost for the transition. I believe in Washington State, I think it was $1 million, and of course, we know right at the moment with the forecast we have, and certainly at all times, we want to make sure we're really being smart with the money that we're spending. I will note, though, this, just like this area of early childhood, this really is investment in the long term and in the future. We are spending a lot of money in this area, and we are spending that money in a pretty fragmented way. And we have amazing professionals, as we heard on Tuesday, doing work to coordinate it, the Children's Cabinet Preschool Development Grant. But in the long run, it seems to me anyway, that ends up meaning the money we're spending is being spent in a lot more effective and efficient way if you've got the accountability and authority that comes from having an organization driving it. So that'd be my thought on that second question as well.
And do you have a follow-up, Representative Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And excuse me, I do appreciate those thoughts, Mr. Chair, and I'll think about this more. I am, the cost of it, $1 million, I think is a good investment potentially in the future. I do have qualms about spending that right now. And we'll see what the February forecast shows, but I guess I'd much rather see, in a time where we may end up having to cut things, probably will have to cut certain things. I'd rather see that $1 million put into early childhood scholarships to expand the number of children we can do, and kind of put this on the shelf for a few years into the future. But I will definitely think about that and consider more as I listen to the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any further comments, Mr. Chair?
No, I guess maybe I will just note, this is still as timely as anything, just to say that I would expect that if this proposal does end up moving forward in our process, I would expect it would do so through this committee's budget proposal, if that's the case. And so I do expect, this proposal has to move through a number of committees. It's one reason that we want to make sure to be moving it on and continuing that discussion. But Representative Bennett and everybody else, it will have to come back through our committee as we put together our budget proposal. And at that point, we'll get another opportunity to look at it, look at the costs, and make that assessment then as well. So that may be reassuring for today. It's sort of, this is, in a way, we're kind of more looking at it from a policy perspective today. And that final decision about the spending part of it, if at all, would come at a later date. And I hope that maybe is reassuring to Representative Bennett as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And next we'll go to Representative Jurgens for your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Chair Pinto, it's a bold undertaking. You and I have talked about it, and I appreciate the goals to make these programs more efficient, perhaps reduce or eliminate duplication of efforts. I do have concerns. I know that the goal is that there would be that this isn't a growing government, that it would be a transfer of resources, transfer of employees, transfer of programs. And government unfortunately doesn't do real well with that. And so one of my concerns is that even though the desire and the goal is that this would not grow government, that it would, that as employees leave one department, there isn't a net zero gain, that there would be an increase. So that's one of my concerns. I would like to hear from the three departments and how this would affect them and how they could see this transition taking place. So there's a lot of things that I don't think we're quite ready for. I do understand the need to hit different committees in the process. I think Representative Bennett had some concerns that she brought up that I don't need to reiterate, but some of the same concerns that I had there. But I think the goal is good. I think the goal to have better accountability for these programs that are going to help the youngest Minnesotans, I think that's good. And I appreciate the conversation. I think, though, that we have a ways to go before we're ready to actually move forward with this. But I'm glad that you're bringing it up and we're having the conversation. I look forward to the further conversations, and also after it hits the other committees and having this come back to us, maybe in a slightly different form or even the same form with just more questions answered. So I'll be looking forward to that. And I just want to thank you for bringing this up, and hope that we can come to something where we can definitely get bipartisan support behind this.
Thank you, Representative Jurgens. Chair Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Representative Jurgens. And maybe it's helpful to so as the bill goes to those other committees, I think that'll be a particular opportunity in those committees to be hearing from the individual departments. I know that the plan is to send it, my motion is to send it Education Finance. And so being Chair Dabney's committee, expect to hear thoughts from that perspective there, and in the Health Committee, Human Services, et cetera. And then again, to have it come back and sort of yet another opportunity then to get that perspective. And so, because yeah, absolutely want to be hearing from all directions. And so I just really appreciate your point, Representative Jurgens, and hopefully that lays out for folks as well, kind of the anticipated path here. So thank you.
Right. Oh, yes. Now we see another question. Representative Wozniak, your question or comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not a question, just a comment. I'm really glad to see this proposal come forward. I think, as we've seen from the one presentation we had where they were talking about all of the funding streams and all of the different people and departments and things that are involved in this, it's really complicated for people to understand, and I think it makes it more complicated for families trying to access these programs and services. So I'm glad to see the proposal come forward. You know, I think folks do have some concerns, but I think that it's a good start to the conversation about how we make sure that those programs and resources for our families and our youngest Minnesotans are sort of more accessible and easier to access, and also sort of streamlined in a way that we can hopefully get more folks who are looking for those supports in those programs on board with them, so that we're not sort of struggling to figure out how to put everything together. So appreciate the work that's been done on this, Representative Pinto, and look forward to it moving forward.
Thank you, Representative Wozniak. That's excellent thoughts. And yeah, I will build on that idea is that especially people that are new members of this committee, you probably have felt like there's a steep learning curve because we hear not just from one department, but we hear from multiple departments that all have a significant role to play in this area of early childhood learning. And it's a lot of information and part of that is because it's fragmented information. And instead of pulling together as one source to say, this is how we address this is how we're doing this. It's everybody's trying to do a little bit of everything in many ways. So I know when I started 3 terms ago, this was an issue then, and it's been an issue every term since then. So I'm appreciative of Chair Pinto's bill that is actually working to bring some resolution and some clarity and some comprehensiveness to this incredibly important work that we're doing. And I see now we also have a question from Representative Katiza Watun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And not a question, but just a quick comment. I wanted to say thank you to Chair Pinto for all the work that he's done in this area. And today, I think, we, when we had the opportunity to hear from NCSL and Ms. May speaking about the different states and different actions that have been taken across the country to kind of move forward. I think, we on this committee, after all the informational hearings that we've had thus far and over the past sessions, we really know that early investments in this part of life can make a dramatic difference, the return on investment. So when we invest in our children, that's going to come back to the state however many times fold, upwards of 10, 18 fold is some of the research that we've seen. But I think that, when we have to consider taking a look and putting in some potential funding upfront to make this system better, that's also going to come back to us in the long run. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion and really consider how this may take us forward to a stronger program and just really centralize so many of the important pieces of early childhood here in Minnesota. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Katiza Watun. And I will turn it to the author of the bill, Chair Pinto, for the final word.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, members, for the good discussion. I want to make sure to emphasize that this proposal is in no way a criticism of the current people doing this work in the administration. In fact, I really can't think of three more qualified commissioners of these departments than Commissioners Harpstead, Malcolm, and Ricker. I mean, just extraordinary people, and their teams are terrific. And I can't really think of anybody with more vision and dedication than Erin Bailey and her team in the Children's Cabinet, which we heard from on Tuesday. So folks are doing incredible work with the structure that we have right now. But I think the lesson from around the country is that that structure has, just the structure itself has some real challenges and some major disadvantages, and that there are significant advantages, as one would expect, when you have responsibility and accountability and authority in one person and one organization to get this critical area right. There's nothing that's more important than getting that right. And so this is the trend in the states. This is where Minnesota should be going, in my view. And I really appreciate members' support to move this on to other committees, continue this conversation, and bring it back before our committee in a few weeks as we're considering our budget at that point. But in the meantime, to keep this conversation going. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, again, and to our national presenters. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chair Pinto. And yes, thank you again to our presenters for the great information that you brought into the committee this morning. So at this point, Chair Pinto renews his motion that House File 1024 be referred to the Education Finance Committee. The clerk will take the roll on this motion.
Representative Pinto, Chair.
Aye.
Representative Pryor, Vice Chair.
Aye.
Representative Franson.
Yes.
Representative Bennett.
No.
Representative Bolden.
Aye.
Representative Daniels.
No.
Representative Dabney.
Aye.
Representative Damon.
Aye.
Representative Jurgens.
Aye.
Representative Katiza Watun.
Aye.
Representative Morrison.
Aye.
Representative Wozlowick.
Aye.
And Representative Wolgamott.
Wolgamott, aye.
Franson, no.
We have 4 nays. And 9 yeses.
There being 9 ayes and 4 nays, the motion prevails and House File 1024 is referred to the Education Finance Committee.